Part 108. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Xiao. Chapter 1107. The man is tall, with silver hair, majestic and dignified, and his white velvet robe is covered with various ribbons and small coats of arms, showing his noble status. The great Atlantis Empire, His Highness Hagrid, the High Priest of the 12 lineages, welcomes you home. Although Hagrid's appearance has changed drastically, he still holds the ocean scepter symbolizing authority in his hand, so his identity is unmistakable. Hagrid seemed to be very pleased with the man's greeting. "Very good, Andy, I haven't seen you for a few years, but you have already become an excellent Archon." After the two exchanged polite greetings, Andy finally looked at Sutong and others aside, and his originally friendly face suddenly turned gloomy. "Oh, these are the guests I specially invited. Don't neglect them." Hagrid was afraid that Andy would anger scary guys like Sutong as soon as he opened his mouth, so he deliberately spoke first. After hearing Hagrid's words, Andy was startled, and the displeasure on his face immediately disappeared, but there was still a bit of disdain and contempt in his eyes. This arrogant attitude was naturally not welcomed by Sutong and the others. After noticing Andy's eyes, Sutong just looked at Andy. The white tiger roared in his destiny. In an instant, Andy's pupils suddenly tightened and he saw a huge evil tiger rushing towards him. "Don't want." Andy danced and screamed, then sat down on the ground. All his feces and urine came out, and the stench hit his nostrils. Everyone was stunned at this moment, and then Gao Zhou and others laughed unceremoniously. Ha ha ha. The harsh laughter brought Andy back to his senses. Only then did he realize that there was no evil tiger at all. He knew in his heart that he had been tricked, and his face suddenly became extremely embarrassed. "How dare you use evil magic on me?" Andy climbed up like a lion that was stimulated, pointed at Sutong and others and roared, "Get them!" As the words fell, the guards in armor behind Andy quickly rushed forward, trying to arrest him. "If you don't want to die, get out of here." Gu Zibai snorted coldly, stepped forward and waved his big hand, and simply slapped the guards away. To be able to become Andy's bodyguards, these people are all first-class masters. According to the Atlantis hierarchy, they are all at least 3-star werewolf warriors. After being slapped by Gu Zibai, he flew to the ground. He immediately got up, his eyes were red, he let out a wolf howl, and they all transformed into werewolves and rushed forward again. However, the result did not change. Facing the rushing figure, Gu Zibai didn't even raise his head, and slapped the werewolf's teeth directly with a loud slap. The slaps of Papa Papa continued to rise and fall, and soon these so-called masters were lying on the ground, wailing in pain. Andy was so angry that he was shaking and could only look at the High Priest Hagrid. As a result, Hagrid turned a blind eye to this and glared at Andy coldly. "That's enough, Andy, these people are my distinguished guests. Your arrogance and rudeness are simply an embarrassment to the Empire." Maybe Hagrid never dreamed that Hagrid would say such words in front of everyone. Could it be that his distinguished guest was more important than himself, the great consul? Hagrid ignored the pale Andy, turned around and made a gesture of invitation to Sutong and others. "Please come to my manor to rest first. I need to go back to the temple." "Don't worry, I will be back soon." So under the shocked eyes of everyone, Sutong and others got on the carriage originally prepared for Hagrid and slowly headed towards the city center of Atlantis. Walking along the avenue, every few dozen feet, at the intersection, there is a circular or other regular polygonal fountain. Under the fountain is a pool. The water is clear and translucent. There are young people from the sea holding harps gathered in groups beside the fountain, playing the harp lazily. The sweet music of the piano attracted the chorus of birds in the sky. Those tall and beautiful men and women, wearing spacious robes mainly in white, blue, and red, walked on the street with relaxed faces. Hagrid's manor is even more luxurious. It is a huge palace with 3 floors, each floor is about 3 feet high. The built-in landscapes and fountains are as magnificent as a palace. In such a long time, to have such a luxurious building really makes everyone feel a bit dreamy. Hagrid did not dare to make Sutong and the others wait any longer. After a brief report, he quickly returned to the manor and immediately warmly entertained Sutong. All kinds of delicacies were served on the dining table, allowing Sutong and the others to relax and start eating. After all, they have not had a decent meal after being out for so long. After he had eaten and drank enough, Sutong asked Hagrid to find a quiet room for him. He was going to retreat. During this period, Gaozhou and the others could just play and relax. After they had completely digested Genesis, they left here and headed for Mount Tai. However, as soon as the itinerary was discussed, Sutong frowned. When he raised his head, he saw a flare hitting the air. Something happened on the battleship. Gaozhou and others stood up one after another. Hagrid was also shocked. He had clearly ordered that no one be allowed to approach the battleship. How could something go wrong? The Sun battleship was docked at Hagrid's super fortress, surrounded by heavily guarded guards. It was supposed that nothing would happen. But at this moment, the signal flare was sent out, indicating that Ame, who was sitting on the battleship, was definitely in big trouble. Go back. Just in case, Sutong also set up a teleportation beacon on it so that he could teleport back at any time. The moment he saw the signal flare, Sutong immediately took out the teleportation beacon and teleported directly back to the battleship. When Sutong rushed back through the teleportation beacon, his face instantly turned cold, and he saw that the battleship was surrounded by people. Stand back, you bastards. If you dare to attack my battleship, you are trying to rebel. Hagrid didn't have a teleportation beacon, so it only took him a few breaths to catch up with his strength. When he saw the surrounded battleships, Hagrid's face instantly turned livid. He waved his scepter and pointed at the leader of the warriors, Rhea, who told you to do this? Are you provoking me? As one of the 12 high priests, the area around his fortress is a restricted area. Even if he kills people, no one dares to accuse him. The soldier named by Hagrid could only grimace and step forward bravely and said, I'm sorry, Your Highness Hagrid, your distinguished guest has rescued a group of fugitives. These fugitives are very dangerous. His Highness Aogu personally captured them. So. When he heard Aogu's name, most of the anger on Hagrid's face had subsided. He turned around and walked to Sutong, explaining in a low voice, Aogu is the head of the 12 priests, and he has more authority than me. It's much higher, so it's a bit troublesome. Hagrid is the 12th high priest, but he is a newcomer and is much younger than Aogu, who has lived for almost 400 years. The implication is that I hope Sutong will not directly conflict with Aogu. If those people are not important, just return them to them. Sutong called Ji Zhou and asked what happened. I did it. Ji Zhou held out his chest and said to Sutong. It turned out that when they were ordered to guard the battleship, they saw people parading in the street below. Originally, Ji Zhou and the others would not care about other people's affairs. But he discovered that the people being paraded through the streets were all Chinese just like them. These people were tied with iron chains and dragged on the road by horse-drawn carriages, allowing the surrounding residents to throw stones at them. How could Ji Zhou and the others tolerate this? They were in a foreign land and saw compatriots who had the same skin color and language as themselves. How could they not save them? So Ji Zhou personally led a team and rushed to rescue people. Although their individual strength is not as good as the warriors of Atlantis, when they form a battle formation, it is a crushing battle. He beat the parade team until their noses were bruised and their faces were swollen, and he rescued the people. Not long after, this happened. After speaking, Ji Zhou asked people to bring up the rescued prisoners. As Ji Zhou said, these people are all Chinese, with yellow skin and black hair, exactly like them. The only difference was that most of these men wore a simple animal skin draped around their bodies, and their shoulders were pierced by some kind of special torture instrument. They looked at Su Tong with the same confusion. Seeing this, Su Tong turned back to look at Hagrid. They are all prisoners of war captured on the front line. Hagrid explained to Su Tong bravely that the scope of Atlantis was constantly expanding, so there was friction with the Xia kingdom in the east. These prisoners of war were from the front line. Got caught. Su Tong snorted coldly when he heard this. What if I want to protect them? If you want security, you have to pay ransom in exchange. The clouds in the sky twisted and turned into a huge face. Ogu. Seeing this, Hagrid hurriedly stepped forward and bowed slightly to the huge face in the clouds. Even though he was also a member of the 12 High Priests, Hagrid had to lower his noble head when he saw Ogu. Hagrid, your distinguished guest is so rude. The clouds and mist twisted, and Ogu's voice rippled throughout Atlantis like thunder. Everyone could hear it clearly. It was a huge blow to Hagrid's authority. Hagrid's expression changed, and he suddenly became angry. Your Excellency Ogu, what you said is really disrespectful. They are my most distinguished guests. I won't allow you to humiliate them like this. I can pay these people's ransom, come pay, but you need to apologize to my guest. After saying this, Hagrid did not forget to turn around and said to Su Tong, please believe me, I will never allow anyone to offend you no matter what. Hagrid's compliment surprised everyone, but what was even more unexpected was that when Su Tong heard the words, he directly pulled up the small bench and sat down, and took out the cigarette pole in a leisurely manner. This made Hagrid start to murmur in his heart. Su Tong lit the match, slowly roasted the tobacco, and said to Hagrid without raising his head, yes, please continue your performance. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 1109. As soon as these words came out, both Hagrid and Ogu on the top of the clouds looked stiff. Hagrid's lips trembled slightly. What do you mean? It's nothing, I just think it's a bit of a coincidence. After all, we just came to the door and you just walked back to the temple, and there were people dragging you and our tribe to parade on the street. I don't know whether to say this is a test or a borrowing chance to sing a double act. Su Tong squinted his eyes and looked at Hagrid, spitting out a puff of green smoke down his nose. The lingering green smoke surrounded Su Tong's face, making the expression on his face flicker bright and dark, terrifyingly sinister. No, 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 you are too worried. You are my distinguished guest. I guarantee in the name of my ancestors that such a thing will never happen. Hagrid's expression was distorted, even though he was trying his best to control his expression and appear calm. But there was still uncontrollable fear on his face. He tried his best to defend himself, but his nervous body exuded the smell of guilt. Such despicable acting skills, not to mention an acting master like Su Tong, even Gao Zhou and others who came from the side could clearly see it. All right, all right. Seeing the large beads of sweat on Hagrid's forehead, Su Tongzhen was worried that if this guy continued to argue, the show would end before it even started. He waved his hand to signal Hagrid to quiet down, and then said to Ogu, who was above his head very cooperatively, you just asked for a ransom. What kind of ransom do you want? This time it was Ogu's turn to be in trouble. Their original script did not play out like this. According to their original plan, if Su Tong took the bait, they would find a way to slowly put forward some small conditions step by step to lure these people into the bait step by step. The ultimate goal is to get back Hagrid's soul fragments at the minimum cost. But now, looking at Su Tong's face, I fully cooperated with you guys' performance, Ogu began to murmur in his heart. Fortunately, he has survived for so many years and has become a mature man. After thinking about it for a moment, he realized Su Tong's intention. This despicable guy. Ogu cursed inwardly and breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Although the plan had changed, At least it could be judged from the other party's words and deeds that they were not interested in Hagrid's soul fragments. In other words, they themselves prefer to exchange Hagrid for greater benefits. Thinking of this, Ogu could only be patient and continue to play out the scene, but he probably had no time to take care of the details. It's ridiculous that the script they discussed for 3 hours was ruthlessly turned to the finale just after it started. For His Highness Hagrid's sake, you can do whatever you want with these prisoners of war, but I heard that you are extremely powerful warriors, so I would like to invite you to participate in the gladiatorial trial field. When they heard the words gladiator trial field, the people who were watching the excitement suddenly started to revel. Even under such a highly developed civilization, people still have a great passion for blood and sand. What's the benefit? Su Tong neither agreed nor refused, but asked straightforwardly about the benefits. Ogu already had a strategy to deal with this. We still have many such prisoners. If you win one game, we will release 100 of them. Ogu did not say what would happen if he lost, but only said that if he won, he would release the prisoners. Su Tong knew in his heart that Ogu was playing tricks on him, but when he looked back at the compatriots with the same skin color as himself, Su Tong agreed without hesitation. The two agreed to meet in the arena tomorrow. Ogu's face in the clouds disappeared with the breeze, which made Hagrid beside him feel very uncomfortable. Fortunately, Su Tong did not embarrass him and pretended not to know anything. The high priest still had his value. Su Tong did not need to teach this guy a lesson at this time. After all, who would be in trouble with his own money tree? Su Tong then walked up to the prisoners and signaled Hagrid to remove their shackles. After opening these special shackles, Su Tong tentatively asked the other party, "Who are you and why were you captured by these guys?" Facing Su Tong's inquiry, these men covered in animal skins looked at each other, and then one of them spoke with difficulty, but the accent was a little strange. Su Tong and the others couldn't understand. Fortunately, Aimee was beside them, and she was very used to the accents of these men. These are people from a tribe who were caught here without even knowing what was going on. Aimee frowned. These people were not so-called prisoners of war at all, they were just ordinary people. These people from Atlantis are totally taking credit from them. Hearing this, Hagrid on the side suddenly looked embarrassed and coughed twice. Ahem, there will always be such things on the battlefield, it is inevitable, it is inevitable. Su Tong rolled his eyes at Hagrid, and immediately motioned to Aimee to continue asking them how many people were imprisoned here. 300 people, they are men from more than a dozen tribes around. They only arrest men. After hearing Aimee's translation, Su Tong sighed. He asked himself that he was not a kind person. It would be fine if he had not encountered such a thing. Now that he had encountered it, of course he would not sit idly by and ignore it. It doesn't matter, we have to go to Mount Tai anyway, and it doesn't matter if we take them with us. With a fat man like Li Bo here, we can afford to support even 3,000 people, not to mention 300 people. When Su Tong asked Li Bo and others to help prepare some food for these people, these men gradually let down their guard. Gradually, the relationship with Su Tong and the others began to become harmonious. When Hagrid saw this, he wisely ran away with his head lowered. Su Tong chatted a lot with them, but what was disappointing was that they were just some tribes in the mountains and had not really come into contact with the official power of the Chinese land. Is this era still the tribal era? Gao Zhou was a little jealous. In this era, the hair-shedding technology of Atlantis has developed to such an extent, but the Chinese side is still in the tribal era. Don't let other people's ambitions destroy your own prestige like this. Su Tong didn't think so. Since they call these people prisoners of war, it means that Atlantis is still at war with China, and I'm afraid they haven't won, otherwise how could they go catch these tribesmen and take credit? As soon as these words came out, Gao Zhou and others suddenly realized that this seemed to be the truth. With such a terrifying technological civilization as Atlantis, there are still 12 super masters sitting in charge, and they are not getting any benefits. It shows that in China at this moment, the masters are even more terrifying, otherwise I will be sorry for this road of trials. Su Tong's analysis made Gao Zhou and others feel more confident, and they were looking forward to their next trip to Mount Tai. Moreover, Su Tong also discovered that although these men were all members of ordinary tribes, each of them was extremely powerful. If they were not incompetent in martial arts and not good at fighting, they would not be captured so easily by the people of Atlantis. Arrive. After calming them down, Ame pulled Su Tong aside. I'm afraid we need to be more careful in this industry, especially here. I'm worried about fraud in tomorrow's arena. Don't worry, in the worst case we can fight out. Su Tong put his hand on Ame's waist and said confidently. With Lao Bai, a powerful immortal, and the fact that he had just comprehended the second inheritance of the 9 immortals cauldron, no one could stop them if they wanted to kill them. Besides, Hagrid's life is still in his own hands after all, and he is not afraid of anything happening to them. While the two were talking, they walked down the fortress and walked along the Golden Avenue, treating it like shopping. He had dated Ame several times in the past, but at that time Ame couldn't leave the script studio. Now it's better, and they can go shopping openly. However, Ame was not as optimistic as Su Tong. He and Su Tong walked quietly on the bustling street. Walking along the avenue, every few dozen feet, at the intersection, there is a circular or other regular polygonal fountain. Under the fountain is a pool. The water is clear and translucent. There are young people from the sea holding harps gathered in groups beside the fountain, playing the harp lazily. The sweet music of the piano attracted the chorus of birds in the sky. I have read the history of gods, but the records about Atlantis are extremely vague. This is the source of Western mythology, but it was eventually destroyed and prospered. Werewolves, vampires, witches, and Western gods all seem to be, it is related to this place, but there is no precise data record. It seems that someone has erased this period of history and made it impossible for people to check it. Therefore, this is an almost primitive world. At this point, Ame whispered, "This Lord Domu Yuen deliberately left such a trial path, but on this road, there is someone waiting for you, so you have to be careful." As one of the managers of the script library, Ame knows too much inside information and is very clear about what the gods are doing. Originally, the world was divided into reality and realm, with realm being the projection left behind by reality. This is a state of balance between yin and yang, but the gods greedily turned the state into a script. Choose humans to become players, and follow the scripts they set to become their tool to control the scripted world. After thousands of years of this, the world has been riddled with holes by the gods, and the world occupied by those players has become even more unrecognizable. But Domu Yuanjun left such an almost primitive route. On the surface, it was to leave a trial path for her disciples, but it was not normal no matter how you looked at it. Su Tong knew that Ame was worried about him, but now he had no more way to go. Whether it is the gods of death like the youngest and the others, or the gods of the heavens, or even at this moment, does he have more choices? At this time, Su Tong couldn't help but recall that he thought he would be free and at ease after jumping out of the chessboard. But when he jumped out without knowing it, he realized that there was a bigger chess game outside. He was still a chess piece, but this time, he couldn't see clearly who was playing the chess piece. Just like their original plan for the trip to Mount Tai, Su Tong had some ideas in his mind, but he didn't dare to confirm it. After all, it would be terrible if Fu Jun was in charge. The master, the master, the master's wife, the goddess, they are all being held captive here in Yinko. These are all things on the surface. If it is really him, then does it mean that, from the time I met the master, no. Even earlier, when he got the papermaker's book, he had already come into Fu Jun's sight? It was not an unreasonable conjecture for him to think so. He was born without any fetters and was originally free and carefree, but by chance, he became the heir of the 7 sects, and then inherited the plum blossom lineage. If you break down the cause and effect on yourself, Buddhism accounts for 20%, Taoism accounts for 10%, and the remaining miscellaneous things account for 56%. The rest are all related to the underworld. The gods can observe the future, even if it is often said that the future is not trustworthy, but it depends on who it is. A being at the level of Fajun can control his own destiny completely at his fingertips. Thinking of this, Su Tong felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave for a moment, and even had chills running down his spine. Just when Su Tong thought about it more and more, his heart grew colder, and a pair of hands hugged him from behind, which made Su Tong recover from the panic. Ame hugged Su Tong, although she was speechless. It was worth 10,000 words. At the same time, in the Poseidon temple, the 12 high priests sat together with dark faces. Hagrid lowered his head and looked gloomy. In the end, Ogu, as the head of the high priest, spoke, "Things have already happened. There is no benefit in talking more. Since the other party is willing to participate in the duel, everything should proceed according to the original plan. I don't accept it." After Ogu finished speaking, he was immediately interrupted by a white-haired old man. "Why should we wipe his ass for his affairs? In the Genesis project, he occupied 25% of the energy resources, and in the end he became the trophy of those outsiders. I am now asking for a vote on Hagrid. I think he is fit to serve as High Priest again." As soon as these words came out, Hagrid's face instantly turned pale, and then he glared at the white-haired old man angrily. "Sphinx, you bastard, if you hadn't failed on the battlefield, how could these barbarians appear in Atlantis? You still have to apply for 10% of the energy supply to build your bullshit war machine. I see that thing is a living target." Sphinx snorted when he heard this, and said with a smile, "But I at least expanded the territory of Atlantis by 3 areas and completed the alliance with Dung Ai. A defeat on the battlefield basically means that no problem." The two of them were noisily going back and forth, causing several other high priests to watch a dog-eat-dog joke. In fact, the Sphinx is not the only one who is dissatisfied with Hagrid. Atlantis' most precious resource is energy, which is extracted from solid crystals on the seabed. Each of them has relevant important projects at hand, such as genetic modification, heavy weapons research, etc., all of which require these energy sources. But except for the 30% chair occupied by Ogu, the other 70% of the energy is divided among the 11 of them. When it is not enough, this guy still occupies 25%. Genesis is indeed a miraculous study, but now this study has been completely in vain. No one would be satisfied with such a major mistake. And everyone knows that Hagrid and Ogu have an extraordinary relationship. Hagrid must give at least 15% of the 25% of energy to Ogu every year. So the Sphinx said it was deposing Hagrid, but what it was actually challenging was Ogu's authority. Seeing the fierce quarrel between the two, Ogu felt like a mirror. He waved his hand to signal the two to be quiet and said, "Hagrid made a serious mistake, but now is not the time to hold him accountable. The authority of Poseidon Temple cannot be doubted. He must be held accountable. Give back the pieces of his soul." Having said this, Ogu stood up. "Whoever can get back the soul fragments in the gladiatorial tournament will get 25% of Hagrid's energy supply." Hearing this, the Sphinx immediately beat the drum and stopped talking. After all, 25% of energy supply is what they really want. When the meeting dispersed, everyone dispersed, and the Sphinx and the other 4 high priests walked on the gold-paved avenue outside the temple. This is not an easy matter. These barbarians are very powerful. Since Hagrid can be defeated, do we need to fight in person? A high priest was not optimistic about the plan of the arena. He prefers to go directly to Su Tong to negotiate terms, but the price is too high. After all, Hagrid is the high priest, not a cat or a dog, and the other party will not let go of this opportunity for the lion to open his mouth. Not necessarily. A mysterious smile appeared on the corner of the Sphinx's mouth. We don't have to play in person, but don't forget, we have the Saras gem. The other four high priests' eyes lit up when they heard this. This is a good idea. The Saras gem is a technology that has been developed by Atlantis for a long time. It can use the power of the gem as a medium to temporarily transfer the power of one, several, or even dozens of people to other people through the gem. The five high priests gathered all their power to create a god. It would be extremely easy to defeat the other party. Just in time. When the time comes, 25% of Hagrid's energy will be given, and each of us will receive 5%. No, no, no. Just in case, we need to bring in one more person. The Sphinx shook her head at this moment. As soon as these words came out, the other four people suddenly looked strange. After all, 25% is not easy to divide among 6 people. But Sphinx seemed to have understood the thoughts of these 4 guys. He grinned and sneered, so we need to recruit free labor. Who? When they heard it was free, everyone immediately became interested. The Sphinx smiled evilly and said, of course it's Hagrid. He needs soul fragments, we need energy, and we wipe his ass. Shouldn't he use some strength as compensation? Oh, it is simply a manifestation of wisdom that the great Poseidon can choose you as his messenger. When the 4 high priests heard this, they all praised the Sphinx. At this moment, Hagrid did not know that he had become a labor force and was being targeted by his nemesis, the Sphinx. After everyone left, Hagrid walked to Aogu's side and knelt down on one knee in front of Aogu with a guilty look on his face. I'm sorry that I lost your hard work. Everyone knows that Genesis is Hagrid's brainchild, but they don't know that Genesis is actually Ogu's research. It's just that Aogu is now researching something more powerful. Once the research is successful, this era will be divided into 2, and the world will belong to Aogu from now on. It was precisely for this reason that Ogu assigned the Genesis project to Hagrid. My child, you are still very young. The foundation of Genesis is still there. It won't take much time to start over. Ogu didn't mean to blame Hagrid. He was still writing a draft about his research in his hand, as if time was extremely precious to him. Hagrid glanced at it and found that there was a lot of content in the draft. Among them, a huge sphere draft caught Hagrid's attention the most. But Hagrid's mind was not on that. He said worriedly, those guys like Sphinx are becoming more and more dishonest. He used to be your student, but now he can't wait to attack you. Hearing this, the quill pen in Ogu's hand paused for a moment, and then continued to write the draft drawing in his hand. Don't worry, I think he will always be a good boy. Good boy. Hagrid didn't agree with this, but he still continued to praise, your tolerance and magnanimity make me feel ashamed. Only after Hagrid retreated did Ogu stop the pen in his hand, look deeply in the direction Hagrid left, and said meaningfully, you are also a good boy. A good boy must know how to sacrifice. The next day, the sky was dim and bright. When the first ray of the sun penetrated the sea and irradiated the golden avenue of Atlantis, the residents of Atlantis had already walked out of their homes, playing moving music, wearing gorgeous dresses. It looked lively, as if attending a grand ceremony. Is your place so lively every day? Gao Zhou yawned. Although sleep was not important to him, getting up so early still made Gao Zhou a little unhappy. Looking at the cheering figures on the street, Gao Zhou looked back at the werewolf Dyson. No, but the gladiatorial trial is not just a simple battle, but also a gift to Poseidon. The most powerful person can not only get rewards from the temple, but also get Poseidon's blessing. Dyson looked at the street outside with a fanatical look in his eyes. For them, this was a celebration, just like the spring festival. Oh. Then how strong is your most powerful warrior? Gao Zhou asked casually. This seemingly casual question is actually the focus of everyone's attention. Gu Zibai and Su Tong on the carriage turned their attention to Dyson. As for Li Bo, Master and Ame, Su Tong asked them to return to the Sun battleship in order to be ready to meet them at any time. Chang Wuju, this guy said he was not interested in fighting performances and went for a walk. As for what he was going to do, Su Tong didn't know, but since this guy started on the path of an assassin, his temper has become more and more old-fashioned. Him hiding in the dark can be regarded as a layer of insurance. The strongest warrior is naturally the werewolf Simon Mutu. Dyson did not hesitate when mentioning this warrior because he was recognized as the strongest warrior. After transforming into a werewolf, his ability can reach up to 40 stars, making him the most powerful warrior among werewolves. Su Tong calculated in his mind that he was almost at the peak level of Jean Dao, and still a long way from being a Hideo Earth Immortal. Not to mention Gu Zibai, even Gao Zhou could easily torture him. So easy? You don't need those old guys to do it yourself, right? Su Tong was a little confused. But even if they do it themselves, Su Tong is not afraid. Seeing the thin boy next to him, with a short body, a human immortal, martial arts to the extreme, 3 generations of gods have to get slapped twice before leaving. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 1110. The shape of the arena in the west seems to be inherited from the same origin. The huge prototype building looks similar to the arena left in Greece in reality. It just looks more beautiful and spectacular. The smooth marble columns are covered with reliefs of Poseidon. There are channels that lead the clear spring water to form 12 small waterfalls. With the embellishment of gold, gems, and crystals, it would be impossible to associate such a beautiful work of art with the cruel battle of blood and sand without mentioning it. Welcome, stranger from the east. Su Tong and others rode a carriage and entered directly in front of the most luxurious box in the arena. As soon as they got off the carriage, Su Tong saw 12 high priests representing the highest authority of Atlantis sitting on chairs and waiting. On the throne made of gold, the white cashmere carpet, the gorgeous robes on their bodies, and the exquisite scepters in their hands were both luxurious and solemn. The more Su Tong looked at them, the more he felt that these 12 high priests were quite similar to the 12 red-robed archbishops of the Holy See. The difference between the two might be that they believed in different gods, plus a pope. This made Su Tong feel more and more that maybe the predecessor of the Holy See was Atlantis, and the Genesis in his Ruyi furnace was the best proof. This feeling. It's so unpleasant. Gao Zhou said in the team channel that after all, facing 12 top powerhouses, second only to the power of the 3rd generation of gods, he felt unsure. Fortunately, Su Tong and Gu Zibai, 2 supermasters, were by their side, and their powerful auras were not much weaker than those of the 12 high priests. After both sides looked at each other, they were both a little surprised. As Hagrid said, these 2 strangers from the east are extremely powerful. Gu Zibai's aura was as immovable as a mountain, and the pressure of the 12 of them could not shake him at all. Su Tong on the other side was like an abyss. No matter how they used their mental power to test, they all came back in vain, as if this guy was a bottomless pit and could not reach the bottom. Su Tong and Gu Zibai looked calm, but in the team channel they were discussing the strength of the 12 people in front of them one by one. According to the ranking order of actions, it is obvious that Hagrid's strength can only be ranked at the bottom. From left to right, the strength is stronger than the last. If these 12 people join forces, we may also have to run away. Gu Zibai had to admit that Atlantis was not unreasonable as the source of Western mythology. Even with his current strength, which was enough to shatter the stars and destroy all laws, if 12 people concentrated their efforts to attack him, Gu Zibai would have to stay away. More than that. Su Tong's eyes finally locked on Agu. This was the second time the two met, but they only saw each other's true appearance at this moment. He looked like he was in his early 50s, but if Hagrid was right, this guy was already almost 400 years old. This guy has been sitting at the top for so long, and his strength may not be much worse than that of himself and Guzibai. If we really start to fight, it's okay to fight one-on-one, but if we really add other high priests to assist, it's not easy to say. The two sides looked at each other for a few minutes, and finally Ogu interrupted the quiet atmosphere. "Welcome, distinguished guests from the East, we are honored by your arrival. Please take a seat." Ogu warmly entertained Sutong and the others and took their seats at the viewing banquet. At this moment, the auditorium was packed with people, and there were too many performances to attend. Sutong was not very interested in this. Instead, he took out his hookah and started smoking slowly. The clouds of smoke made the priests sitting around extremely disgusted, but they were helpless for a while. Jingle. At this time, the collision of iron ropes was heard, and hundreds of tribal men were pushed to the bottom. According to the previous agreement, as long as you can win, you can take these prisoners of war. What if I lose? Sutong asked with squinted eyes. Simple, equal exchange. Whatever you think these prisoners of war are worth, you can just exchange them with something of equal value. In other words, as long as you think these prisoners of war are worthless, it doesn't matter. At least here, their lives are of no concern. Care. Ogu's voice was so loud that everyone in the audience below could hear it clearly. The arrogance revealed in his words drew warm cheers from the audience. Because of the arrival of Sutong and the others, people in Atlantis were always in panic during this period, especially last night, as they didn't know where the news came from. It is spread among the crowd that these yellow-skinned and black-haired guys are uncivilized devils with no manners. At this time, the expressions of Sutong and the others suddenly changed. It is not impossible if he is determined to be shameless, but he cannot afford to embarrass this person. This is not only a derogation of these compatriots, but also a devaluation of their ethnic group. After all, they are members of the same race with the same skin color. Damn, these are thieves. No wonder those shedding gangs in the West like to engage in racial discrimination. Their emotions were not learned well from their ancestors. Gao Zhou cursed loudly in the team channel. Sutong raised his eyebrows slightly. Although he was annoyed in his heart, there was no anger on his face. His mind opened and closed, and he had an idea in a moment. I saw Sutong put away the hookah pipe in his hand, stood up unhurriedly, bowed slightly to Aogu in front of him, and said seriously, "Your generosity is as warm as the sun in the sky." Aogu raised a smile on his lips, and the high priest sitting behind him had even weirder expressions, half smiling but not smiling. They seemed to feel that Sutong and others did not understand that Aogu was mocking them. However, Sutong's next words made all the smiles on the faces of Aogu and others freeze. "However, the lives of my tribe and mine are equally important. There is a saying in the East that all living beings are equal. For this reason, I am willing to use the soul fragments of High Priest Hagrid as a bet." As Sutong spoke, he even took out the fragments of Hagrid's soul and placed them in his palm. The fragmented soul gave birth to Hagrid's vague outline in his palm, which proved that it was Hagrid's soul. Now Ogu and others were all dumbfounded. The original plan of Aogu and others was just to take the opportunity to mock Sutong and others, and at the same time arouse the opponent's competitive mentality. By adding layers of pressure, Sutong could gradually get the pieces of Hagrid's soul. Come out. But they didn't expect that Sutong would go straight to the stud. Fortunately, there are no landlords in this era, otherwise I am afraid Ogu would shout, "Can you play cards? If you get a 3, you will lose the king?" This time it was Ogu and the others' turn to look ugly. Sutong's doing this is good news for them. A group of insignificant prisoners of war, garbage with no research value, in exchange for Hagrid's soul. No matter how this deal is made, Atlantis is making money with blood. But the same question was thrown back by Su Tong at this moment. Can they afford to throw this person away? Even if Hagrid loses his face, do they also have to lose the face of being the 12 high priests? This is not only a huge blow to the ruler's prestige, but also a humiliation to Poseidon God. As the saying goes, if some things are not weighed, they will weigh less than 2 kilograms, but if they are weighed, they will weigh 1,000 kilograms. Su Tong's voice could be heard clearly by the audience below. He was even afraid that they wouldn't see it. He raised his palms high and almost walked down to let everyone see clearly. The soul fragment in his hand was exactly the same. It is the soul of the 12 high priest Hagrid. Being held in someone's hands like this and used as a bargaining chip is no less than leaving Hagrid in the crowd and going on parade. For a moment, the veins on Hagrid's face bulged and stretched. This is to completely rub Poseidon's face on the ground. Su Tong looked at Hagrid with a smile. The bright smile on his face was as innocent as an ignorant child. But no matter how you look at it, it makes people feel hateful. His Highness Hagrid's soul fragment is fake, right? That is, how could the souls of the 12 high priests be in the hands of these evil guys? It's hard to say. After all, they were brought by His Highness Hagrid. If the soul fragments are real, then everything will be explained. Oh, what are soul fragments? The people in the audience below were about to explode. Most people didn't know what soul fragments were. But they all know that this thing seems to be very important to His Highness Hagrid and to Poseidon Temple. Linking such an important thing to these prisoners of war, no, slaves, is simply an insult to Poseidon. Even though it was the city of Aogu, it finally couldn't hold back at this moment. It stood up with a cold face and glared at Su Tong. Huh? What's the problem? Su Tong looked confused when he saw Aogu's eyebrows were ferocious and his eyes were cold. Now Ogu opened his mouth, and finally swallowed back all his anger. They were all the conditions he proposed. Su Tong just followed his conditions. No matter what, Ogu couldn't find any fault. Moreover, when Su Tong opened his mouth, he first praised him, but he made his words clear and high-sounding. No matter how angry Ogu was, he couldn't break his face at this time. So he could only sit down again, and after trying to calm down the anger in his heart, he said softly, "The High Priest of Atlantis is supreme. Even if this is just a ray of his spiritual thoughts, it is precious beyond all living beings." Aogu couldn't refuse Su Tong, but he didn't agree to it stupidly. It was just to avoid taking a detour, which was not necessarily a bad thing. Besides, his goal was not Hagrid's soul, so he reacted quickly, emphatically stating the high priest's status, and then casually turned something as important as the soul fragment into a ray of spiritual thought. Anyway, the people of Atlantis are not very familiar with things like soul fragments, and only a small number of nobles know about them. On the contrary, it is a spiritual thought, something that people can quickly accept. With this ability to dodge the important and change the concept secretly, Su Tong said in his heart that if this guy doesn't practice Tai Chi, it will be a loss. In view of Atlantis's principles of justice and respect for Poseidon, I can't let the guests who come from afar suffer a loss, so I decided to add another bet. Only this thing can be used as a bet to reflect Hagrid's greatness. This ray of spiritual thought from the priest is precious. Then Ogu signaled someone to take out the box that had been prepared earlier. The box was opened, and a dazzling blue light bloomed inside. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 1111. The mysterious blue light is like the color of the ocean. As soon as this object comes out, the boiling water elements begin to gather here. Everyone stared at the gem in the box with wide eyes, and all of them exclaimed in shock. Even Su Tong and the others did not expect that Ogu and the others would be so generous. Innate water spirit. Su Tong's heart skipped a beat when he saw a polished sapphire in the box. The gem contained infinite power of the water element. How valuable is this thing? Well, the broken gem on Hagrid's scepter is this thing. Therefore, wearing this gem almost has the power to mobilize the power of the sea. It is an innate treasure and of immeasurable value. Is this old guy crazy? I don't know how powerful Lao Bai's slap is. Is this a treasure given to us for nothing? Gao Zhou drooled when he saw it, feeling that this thing was already in their possession. Aga was very satisfied with the shock of Su Tong and others. At this time, the Sphinx sitting in the back quietly stood up and walked out, and then 5 more people stood up and followed, including Hagrid. Su Tong and the others naturally noticed this. Although they felt weird in their hearts, they couldn't always keep an eye on what they were doing when they went out. Ladies and gentlemen, this will be a decisive battle that will make even Poseidon pay attention. At this moment, the host walked into the sand pool below. The thick sand was as soft as stepping on the beach. But under this yellow sand, there are countless lives buried. After the host gave a passionate speech, the metal door opposite slowly opened, and Su Tong and the others looked intently. It was a man with thick long hair, a golden fluffy hairstyle, and he looked like a lion. The man's appearance immediately made the people in the audience excited, and even shouted the man's name, Mewtwo. 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 Deafening shouts filled the sky. The man's straight nose raised, and his deep eyes looked around. His handsome and masculine appearance instantly made all the sluts and young women in the audience scream with excitement. There were even many ladies who tore off their clothes and showed him their graceful figures. Mewtwo's response was just a simple blowing kiss, which fascinated the girls in the audience. In this era where reading is so boring as entertainment, a man who maintains a record of undefeated gladiatorial games has a star aura that is just like that of Jackson in real life. Mewtwo? Isn't it the Simon Mewtwo that Dyson mentioned? Gu Zibai had a good memory and recalled what the boy Dyson said on the carriage. Gao Zhou was a little impressed. Oh, is that the one whose strength is almost at the peak of enlightenment? 40-star werewolf warrior. Su Tong's memory is obviously better than that of Gao Zhou and Gu Zibai, but instead there is deep doubt and confusion on his face. As soon as he heard that the other party only had the strength of the enlightenment realm, Gao Zhou's face suddenly showed joy. Boss, why don't you let me go? I can't kill a chicken with a bull's knife. Gao Zhou got a little carried away and felt that Lao Bai didn't even need to do anything to deal with this werewolf warrior, he could kill him himself. But Su Tong felt something was wrong. Others didn't know how strong Lao Bai was. How could Hagrid not understand? Letting such a werewolf come up is either a free gift or a trap. Su Tong didn't think that Agu, an old fox, would give them treasures for nothing. Don't mess around. You've been a player for so long, have you ever seen pie in the sky? Gao Zhou thought about it, and it seemed to be the truth, but he had actually seen it before. Isn't that Li Bo? Dry. As soon as these words came out, Su Tong was speechless. Li Bo? This guy is just a cheat. He's not very lucky, but he's lucky enough to fly. Listen to his nicknames: Team Red Hand Lost Picking King Shit Strong. When he was out, even if he raised his head and opened his mouth, he wouldn't be surprised if an elixir fell from the sky and hit his mouth. Who told you that you are not Li Bo? Stop talking nonsense, Mr. Bai Qian. Don't be polite to them and kill him directly. The more Su Tong thought about it, the weirder he felt. Just in case, he decided to let Lao Bai send the other party directly on his way. After Gu Zibai nodded to express his understanding, he turned and walked towards the sand pool below. I don't know why, but Su Tong always felt a little uneasy at this moment, especially after Hagrid and others walked out just now. Su Tong began to feel guilty. This was not a good sign. He was blessed with destiny and had a premonition that something was not going to happen. There must be some reason for this. His eyes scanned the surroundings, and an idea came out, that is, he wanted to activate the power of time to peek into the future. Doing so would inevitably consume a thought, but Su Tong had to take precautions in his heart. When a thought is ignited and an inch of time is activated, a fragment of the future flashes in Su Tong's mind. There was a fierce melee, the ground was penetrated, the sky turned into day, and the terrifying power made the entire Atlantis tremble. How so? Su Tong couldn't help but be shocked by the picture that emerged in his mind. The other party was obviously just an enlightened guy facing a human immortal, and he could easily stab him to death with just one finger. But in the picture he saw at this moment, the two of them were fighting to such an incomparable level. Even if the high priests came in person, they would have no chance of winning against Lao Bai. Su Tong was frightened for a while. Then he wanted to see what other scenes there were in the future, but the result was chaos. The entire arena and even the entire sky above Atlantis were covered in thunder, and the entire world seemed to be in some kind of doomsday. Boom! A ray of purple light tore through the void, which was the power of the Zixiao Divine Thunder Talisman. Did I even take action? Su Tong's heart sank, and he quickly tried to find himself, but as his sight shifted, the picture kept changing. What he saw just now disappeared the next moment, and was replaced by the scene of Gu Zibai easily killing the opponent. The future is not believable, and that's why, because there are so many images that you can't tell what's real or fake. Even if you saw the ending of things 1 second, the ending may be different the next second. The time to peek into the future was short, and Su Tong could only see so much, but it was obvious that this guy was not going to be a good person at the moment. Thinking of this, Su Tong couldn't help but feel a little heavy. He looked at Aogo sitting aside, thinking that if something happened, he would immediately use the 9 Immortals cauldron to kill the old guy first. At the same time, Chang Wuhen was walking boredly in the inner corridor of the arena, but at this moment his appearance completely changed. She has long dark brown hair, a bulging anti-collision air cushion on her chest, and is wearing a maid's outfit, walking around in the inner passages of the arena at will. Is this damn place such a detour? My transformation technique can only last for an hour. If I can't find the exit, I can only tear open the space and leave. Chang Wuhen cursed in his heart. Yan Zioqi's arena was much simpler than this one. God knows why the design here is so complicated. Hello. At this moment, a Mediterranean man suddenly poked his head out of the door. When he saw Chang Wuju, a look of displeasure suddenly appeared on his face. What are you doing here? Chang Wuhen was startled, and before he could speak, Mediterranean impatiently stuffed the plate with wine in his arms into his arms, and pinched Chang Wuhen's chest. This greasy look made Chang Wuju feel nauseous, but Mediterranean said nonchalantly, "Don't be stunned, come with me quickly, His Highness Hagrid and the others are still waiting." When he heard Hagrid's name, Chang Wuju's heart skipped a beat and he calmly put away the dagger under the plate. The two walked along the corridor to another room. Chang Wuju glanced around and found that not only Hagrid was there, but also 5 other figures wearing sacrificial robes standing there. There was a huge crystal in the room in front of him, and the handsome figure of Simon Mewtwo was reflected on the crystal. Later, the 5 of us will inject power into Simon's body at the same time, enough to make him become a god in a short time. Even if the opponent is very powerful, he will definitely not be Simon's opponent. But if you do this, Simon may not survive. It's almost the same. You'll have to be disabled even if you don't die, but it's worth it to feel the feeling of the gods while you're alive. The 6 people were talking to each other in the room. Chang Wuhen stood aside and listened for a while, and then he roughly understood what was going on. You can't play the positive game, so you want to play the negative game. Chang Wuhen lowered his head and looked at the wine bottle in his hand, with a hint of ferocity in his eyes. He put the wine bottle on the table beside him, took out a vermilion pill from the prop book, and reached out to open the wine bottle. Build. What are you doing? But before Chang Wuju could throw the poison in, the Sphinx suddenly turned his head and asked Chang Wuju coldly. Chang Wuhen's heart skipped a beat, and his expression suddenly changed. He put his hands behind his back, and the black water dragon teeth were already in his hands. The Sphinx walked over step by step, frowned, stretched out his hand to pinch Chang Wenzhen's chin. "Stupid thing, the aroma of the wine will disappear when you open the bottle cap." Sphinx said, looking up and down. Chang Wuzu sneered, "Come to my room tonight, and I'll teach you how to pour wine." Sphinx said, then turned around, picked up the wine bottle, walked up to Hagrid and others, and distributed the wine to everyone. Chang Wuju breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. He calculated that the time for his transformation skill was almost up. When he was about to apply oil on the soles of his feet and leave first before thinking of a solution, the Sphinx turned around and pulled him into his arms. "Why are you running? Stay here with me and let you see what it means to be a god." As he said that, he pressed Chang Wuhan against the wall of his own body, and one hand began to wander around his body restlessly. When Hagrid and others saw this, they looked at each other with a look that all men knew, smiled knowingly, and raised their glasses to drink. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 1112. Kaka Kaka. The iron gate outside the sand pool was opened. When Gu Zibai stepped into the sand pool, he was naturally greeted by boos from the residents of Atlantis. After all, to be honest, when it comes to strength, Gu Zibai can knock out the Simon in front of him with one punch, but when it comes to looks, Gu Zibai can't even compare to Simon in terms of flattery. Without the pretense of the script world, Gu Zibai is just a short, thin, and dark-looking little man. There is really no comparison between the two in appearance. As for whether they are masters or not, let alone ordinary people, even if they are Earth immortals, as long as Gu Zibai doesn't do anything, no one can tell how good he is. Ah! At this time, a roaring cry rippled through the arena. Everyone followed the sound and found that it was a captured prisoner of war. This strong man looked at Gu Zibai, who was walking on the stage. He actually had the same appearance as them. Although he didn't know what was going on, he could tell that this was a battle. At this moment, he let out a battle roar at the top of his lungs, cheering for Gu Zibai. The dull expressions of other prisoners of war gradually became looser as he roared, and then another prisoner of war got up, holding onto the railing and letting out a long roar. More and more roars followed, gradually suppressing the boos of the people of Atlantis. Feeling the fighting spirit conveyed by these comrades, Gu Zibai took a deep breath, with a serious murderous look in his eyes, and turned around. "Wait until I take you home." "Hey! Go home? This is your burial place." Simon looked at Gu Zibai in front of him. "Can you defeat the powerful high priest?" "Just in time, let's use your blood as a sacrifice to the Poseidon." As he spoke, the golden hair on Simon's body suddenly grew, and his body quickly transformed into a wolf. His original tall and burly appearance suddenly increased to about 2 meters. A pale golden light surrounded Simon, attracting a burst of cheers from the audience. But this was not the end. Simon's power continued to explode, and golden lightning began to bloom around him. Rumble! Golden arcs of electricity surrounded Simon, causing Simon's power to expand crazily. Terrifying power broke through the sky. If it weren't for the powerful magic array arranged in this arena, I'm afraid it would have been shattered into pieces and turned into ruins at this moment. With Simon as the center, layer after layer of ripples appeared, and the power of the law-like chains wrapped around his body and merged with his body. This kid must be on drugs. Gao Zhou stared at the scene in disbelief with his eyes widened. It's those high priests. Su Tongming opened his eyes and saw 5 blurry figures emerging behind Simon. After thinking of Hagrid and others who had just left, Su Tong immediately understood what was going on and immediately began to feel troubled. He didn't know how Hagrid and others lent their power to Simon by some strange combination, but now that Simon had hit the power of the 5 high priests, his strength was extraordinary, no less than 3 generations of gods. Kill! In the golden light of thunder and lightning, Simon's body became tighter and his eyes gradually became sharper. He knew that no matter whether he won or lost in this battle, he would definitely die. But being able to touch the realm of gods and even kill an opponent who is not weaker than gods in his lifetime is the greatest honor for the warlike Simon. In the future, my statue will stand high in Atlantis and become an object of worship for future generations. At the thought of this, Simon's eyes became more and more fanatical, and he suddenly raised his palm. In an instant, the power of the rules turned into shackles, locking directly on Gu Zibai. Annihilate, reptile. The power of rules and the way of the gods can mobilize the most primitive and simple power in the world to wipe out all living things. At this time, Rao Siaogu and others had a strange look in their eyes. With their strength, they had already reached the pinnacle of this human world, but they had never touched the power of the gods. Now with the power of the 5 high priests, Simon has become a god. This scene is enough to be recorded in the history of Atlantis. Boom! The sky trembles and the earth trembles, as if a great destruction has occurred. All directions are unstable, earth, fire, wind and water are all appearing, trying to open up the world again, and chaotic smoke is flying. However, a fist shining with purple gold punched through the law. Gu Zibai seemed to have come from the ancient past, and his martial arts resonated with the avenue. At this moment, he was the avenue, and his boxing skills were the rules. So strong. Su Tong watched Gu Zibai's battle and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Unlike the simple slap he gave to Hagrid last time, this time Lao Bai let go of his strength and went into the battle with all his strength. It truly shows the horror of human immortals vividly. Gu Zibai was seen fighting out of the shattered laws. His eyes were clear and his hair was flying, as if he was standing in the pure land of the fairy world. But his punches were filled with killing intent. At this moment, the void was about to shatter, and the whole of Atlantis was shaking violently. Kaka kaka. A crack appeared in the magic barrier, and seeing the crack getting bigger and bigger, Ogu and others could not sit still. If the barrier is broken, I am afraid that none of the people present will survive. Ogu immediately stood up. Quick, join me in strengthening the barrier. With that said, he hurriedly led everyone away. Boss, can Lao Bai win? Seeing that there was no one around, Gao Zhuokai asked in a low voice. Su Tong shook his head, feeling that it was difficult to talk about the matter, so he whispered, if something unexpected happens later, you will rush down to grab people as soon as possible, and be sure to take away all the captured clansmen below. Okay. Gao Zhou liked this kind of relaxed work the most, and then he shouted to Chang Wuju in the team channel, Old Chang, you are doing something stupid, come and join us quickly. After a while, I heard Chang Wuju's cold voice, busy. Chang Wuju was indeed busy dealing with the Sphinx in front of him. He put the drink to the Sphinx's mouth with a smile on his face, but his eyes were fixed on the golden gem suspended in front of him. Saras gem. I saw strange textures flashing on the gem. Hagrid and the other 5 people stood in a circle and poured all their power into the gem. Everyone's face was heavy, and some even began to sweat on their foreheads. Even with the guidance of the Saras gem, it is still an extremely difficult task to focus all the power on Simon. If you are not careful, it may even trigger a backlash of divine power. While Hagrid was passing on his skills, he looked at the crystal wall behind him and saw the fierce collision between the 2 people in the arena reflected on it. The fight between the 2 was too fast. Gu Zibai's fist and Simon's claws collided in the empty space. Wisps of order and rules were shattered, accompanied by a scene that was like the beginning of the world. But then the power of countless rules crushed it down. Finally, they rushed past and were separated in 2 pieces of sky. They all looked back at their opponents in the distance. Their eyes were like little suns, emitting rays of light like golden needles, which was extremely frightening. The 2 faced each other with indifference and hostility. Many people's hearts were pounding. This was truly a rare battle. Two strong men who were no weaker than the gods were fighting. This kind of spectacle was not something you could see casually. Boom. The next moment, they collided together again, leaving only a blurry shadow. Simon's body burst out with a dazzling bright light, and his body seemed to be wrapped in a dazzling blue light. It was the terrifying power of the law of the ocean, and any ray of it could reach the entire world. Heavy. At this moment, countless cracks spread like spider webs on the barrier. The spectators in the auditorium were instantly frightened to death. Someone shouted to run, which caused everyone to rush towards the exit crazily. For a moment, women's cries, children's screams, and men's curses were mixed together. Some old people were trampled directly under their feet and were trampled to death on the spot. Ha 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 ha. Amidst the chaos, bursts of cheerful laughter were heard. The owners of the laughter were none other than the imprisoned tribal men. They pointed at these figures who were running for their lives in a panic and made ruthless laughs. Then they raised their fists, cheered towards the thin and fiercely fighting figure, and sang ancient tunes. Even if the world fell apart at this moment, and they would be shattered to pieces, it could not stop them from singing for this powerful warrior. Go to hell. Simon's eyes were red, and there was only one voice in his mind: kill God. I saw him push out with both hands, and the terrifying rules that gathered the power of the four seas descended. In just an instant, Guzibi's figure was swallowed up. At this moment, everyone's heartstrings were tense. Agu and others devoted all their efforts to injecting their own divine power into the barrier. Go to hell. Simon looked up to the sky and roared. There were already cracks in his skin, indicating that his body could no longer bear this huge divine power for too long. Now all Simon hopes is for this skinny little monkey to die as soon as possible so that he can complete the feat of killing the gods and become the strongest gladiator in the history of Atlantis and a god in the arena. But Simon was disappointed. In the chaos, a pair of big hands burning with purple light penetrated the chaos. Guzibi's true form ran rampant in the shackles of countless rules. He shattered the sky with one punch. He was like a god. The world seemed unable to tolerate his true form, which could ignite and destroy the entire universe. No, Simon can't hold it anymore. Sphinx is here to help. Seeing Simon's defeat imminent, cold sweat broke out on the foreheads of Hagrid and others. Their strength at the moment had been drained, and they really could not find more strength to support. Who would have thought that the other party would be so powerful? Even the 5 high priests could not defeat him. Okay. Upon hearing this, Sphinx threw Chang Wuju in his arms to the ground. After Chang Wuhan was thrown to the ground, he rolled along and pretended to be unconscious, but Hai Shui Lanja was already tightly held in Chang Wuhan's hand, staring at him with squinted eyes. Sphinx. He has understood that now that Hagrid and others have no power, as long as the Sphinx puts his hand on it, all the divine power will be drained away. By the time. While Chang Wuhan was thinking about how to cut the Sphinx into pieces. Suddenly, the Sphinx's hand stopped when it was less than an inch away from the Sarast gem. He calmly looked at the time on the water clock. Oh, the time is coming. Everyone was stunned when they heard this, not knowing what it meant. Chang Wugu, who was lying on the ground, was even more frightened. Did he already see through my transformation skills, and was he deliberately delaying time just now? Chang Wuju was startled when he thought of this, but soon realized something was wrong. His time for transformation had not come yet. Just when he was doubting in his heart. Puff. Hagrid and others standing in front of the Sarast gem suddenly vomited blood, and black blood beads overflowed from their orifices. They looked at the Sphinx in disbelief, and then fell to the ground. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 1113. The moment Hagrid and others fell to the ground, The outcome was already certain. Simon waved his arms desperately and suddenly felt a huge pain in his heart. Then the arms in front of him began to turn into ashes and disappear under the power he exerted. The power is gone. Simon's pupils tightened, but when he saw the figure rushing up, he gritted his teeth and used all his strength to raise his other fist and hit Gu Zibai. However, when the fists of the two touched each other, there was no terrifying explosion as expected. Instead, Simon's body was turned into smoke and dust in an instant and dissipated in the air. When watching Simon's figure disappear from under his fist, Gu Zibai did not feel any joy as a winner. Instead, he retracted his fist and placed it on his chest. The desire to challenge the top is not uncommon, but even if you know that doing so will inevitably result in death, you will still choose to fly into the flames. This is the real brave man. There is a winner or lose in a fight, but Gu Zibai's respect for the brave will never diminish because of the opponent's identity. Ha ha ha. Win. Gao Zhou jumped up excitedly, wanting to rush down and give Gu Zibai a big bear hug. Compared to Gao Zhou's excitement, Su Tong looked weird. He always observed every move of the two men fighting, whether it was Lao Bai or Simon. With the last punch, Simon's body had begun to fall apart. He punched out with just this last thought, without any power at all. Even when Simon punched, the 5 figures behind him had disappeared. How is this going? At this moment, his thoughts jumped, and a piece of information was captured by him: Hagrid is dead. Through this guy's soul fragment, Su Tong clearly sensed the information about Hagrid's death. Just when Su Tong was confused, Chang Wuji's voice finally appeared in the team channel: "Boss, run. This is a trap, we are being used as a gun. Gao Zhou, do it." Su Tong did not ask Chang Wuji why, but directly asked Gao Zhou to go and rob people below. Okay. Gao Zhou stood up and jumped down. Before he landed, huge coffins rose from the ground. Densely packed zombies rushed out of them, tearing open the iron cage and pulling out the tribal men. These tribal men looked at these ferocious-looking zombies. Instead of being afraid, they were extremely excited. They picked up everything they could pick up and rushed towards the audience with a loud roar. Don't worry about men and women. If you encounter them, you'll just hit them with a stick. It can be seen that during the time they were captured, they were very angry with these golden-haired ghosts. Brothers, follow me and let's rush out. Gao Zhou waved his hand and kept releasing zombies to clear the way, leading the men to rush out. Now, the people who had finally calmed down from the stampede incident were instantly in a state of panic. Gao Zhou led the warriors of these tribes to copy everything he could see and smashed them wherever he saw them. The guards of the arena rushed over to interfere, but were quickly knocked to the ground by the dense zombies. Su Tong also took advantage of the chaos to come to Gu Zibai's side. The two did not leave immediately. They wanted to buy time for Gao Zhou and see what Ogu and the others were planning. Not long after, Ogu's angry roar echoed throughout the sky above Atlantis. Damn aliens, you actually assassinated us. Hagrid proved your ambition with his kindness. Along with the angry roar, the entire Atlantis was shaking, and huge crystal pillars rose from the ground. Then the crystal pillars flashed with their intense blue light, connecting with each other to form a huge beam network. The energy of the entire Atlantis was completely mobilized. In the end, all the energy beams converged together to form a huge energy ball, sealing the entire arena instantly. Fortunately, Gao Zhou was able to run quickly, but the audience who were still stuck in the loop were miserable. As a dazzling blue light emerged from the energy ball, a destructive force instantly engulfed the entire arena. Boom! The bright light turns the day into darkness. The entire population of Atlantis looked at the scene in horror. Until the bright light dissipates. Only in the center, Su Tong and Gu Zibai were still standing outside. The originally gorgeous and solemn arena was now flat. This level of power was not fatal to either of them. But the arena was reduced to the ground, and as far as the eye could see, no one survived. This guy is so cruel. Su Tong stared at the scorched earth around him with a cold face. He didn't expect that the other party would be so ruthless and completely disregarded the lives of his own countrymen, which were thousands of lives. It's a bit troublesome. This energy barrier has strong interference capabilities, and the teleportation beacon cannot be used. Gu Zibai looked at the blue barrier surrounding it and found that the teleportation beacon could not be used. In other words, if they wanted to leave, they had to forcefully break through the barrier. But this barrier is not so easy to break through. It is a Poseidon barrier created by concentrating the energy of the entire Atlantis. The strength can reach 60 constant levels, which is equivalent to the strength of the energy shields of 6 super fortresses stacked together. Coupled with the energy supply from Atlantis, it would take a lot of effort for Gu Zibai to break through the barrier. Hearing this, Su Tong tried his life-saving trump card Tian Prison and found that although Tian Prison could take the two of them away, it seemed to be greatly disturbed and full of uncertainty. This uncertainty may send them to any corner of the world, but it may also send them directly out of the world. But since it can be teleported, there is nothing to worry about. On the contrary, they should really be worried. Su Tong raised his head and looked at the figures of Aogu and others outside the barrier. "Your Excellency, what do you mean?" Su Tong asked Agu with a smile. Facing Su Tong's questioning, Aogu showed an annoyed look. "You despicable guys, I should have recognized you a long time ago. You are spies from the east. Hand over Genesis, otherwise you will all die today." "Just you?" Su Tong raised his head. He did not underestimate Aogu, but if he wanted to kill himself and Lao Bai just because of them, Su Tong felt that the other party was thinking too much. As early as when they met, Su Tong had looked at the 12 priests one by one. If they joined forces, Su Tong and Gu Zibai turned around and left without saying a word. But now they only have 7 people left. Although I don't understand what happened, with the 7 of them, even if Ogu among them is unfathomable, to say that they killed him is probably an exaggeration. However, Su Tong did not dare to take it lightly. He knew this, and Aogu naturally knew it, but he still chose to confront him, indicating that Atlantis probably still had some means that it had not used. Sure enough, it was just as Su Tong expected. Facing Su Tong's contempt, Aogu just snorted, "I hope you can still laugh later." As they said that, the 7 of them raised their scepters at the same time, and the power of the rules with 7 different attributes was injected into the huge light ball above Su Tong's head. A huge divine power began to revive in the energy ball. Each of their 12 high priests has the power of rules from Poseidon. Now Ogu and the others have brought the power of rules together, and with the huge energy supply of Atlantis, the sleeping Poseidon will be destroyed. They woke up, and although they were not complete Poseidons, they were enough to deal with Su Tong and the other 2. "You can't resuscitate things." Gu Zibai's face changed slightly, and he could feel that the figure in the light ball had a trembling power. This power is completely different from that of Ogu and the others, and is more primitive and powerful. Su Tong also realized that the power of rules obtained by Ogu and others was just a key, and the guy who woke it up was not a good person. Su Tong looked with his life ikumen and divine eyes, and saw an ancient corpse being resurrected in the light. His death god. When he saw the blurry outline of the other party clearly, Su Tong couldn't help but take a breath of cold air and felt his scalp numb. Could it be that the source of Atlantis comes from a god of death? Su Tong knew the horror of the dead gods best. They were gods that existed before the chaos began. Just like beings of the level of old god Stik, Ni Shen, or even the youngest, even if only a wisp of thought is revived at this moment, it is enough to make them unable to walk around. Superior. Su Tong did not dare to hesitate any longer, and rushed forward with a vigorous step. The Moran sword was held in his hand, and he raised his hand and slashed towards the light ball in front of him. The black and white sword light is like splashing ink on a painting. The moment the sword edge cuts down, it will split the world into two. However, Su Tong's move not only had no effect, but seemed to stimulate the thoughts in the light ball. With a deep breath, a palm slowly stretched out from the ball of light, and the palm was grabbed. For a moment, the surrounding void twisted with these 5 fingers. Under the great power, Su Tong's sword light also disappeared in an instant, and the terrifying power continued to spread towards Su Tong. Martial arts and spirituality. At this time, Gu Zibai also followed up to kill him. He held Wu Go in both hands and slashed with all his strength. The terrifying martial arts will penetrated Wu Go, and a frosty air that was enough to freeze time and space broke out. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 1114. The absolute chill, coupled with the blessing of martial arts will, froze the time and space in front of him. Wu Go drew a mysterious trajectory, and the void he crossed collapsed, and then it was like a black hole covering the ball of light in front of him. He wanted to cut off the connection between the ball of light and Atlantis. Even though he was the god of death, what was revived was just a thought. It was a rootless source. As long as he and Atlantis were cut off, the thought of the connection between them will naturally disappear. However, although Gu Zibai's idea was good, when the palm in the light ball was gently tapped down, wisps of cyan divine light spilled out from the fingertips. The divine light hits the sky like a flood, like a raging ocean, and the power of thousands of rules turns into countless divine swords to kill. Boom! There is a riot in the world, with divine power like the sea, destroying all the forces that prevent it from reviving. Although it is just extending a palm at this moment, it has already formed a tendency to crush Su Tong and Gu Zibai. Go together. Su Tong came to Gu Zibai's side, the two looked at each other, and then took action at the same time. The void shook, Gu Zibai's figure was like a dragon, his whole body was wrapped in martial arts wool, his body shone with golden light, like a humanoid magic weapon, countless divine lights fell on his body, unable to move him at all. Wu Go waved up the after images, turning into white lotuses. The ultimate martial arts luck was lingering, and with a shock, he defeated all the incoming water lights. At the same time, Su Tong was already killing him with Emoran in hand. He looked solemn and stood in the future time. The aura of destiny to kill surrounded him. His figure was ethereal, as if he was dancing. He held a sword in his right hand and a sword in his left hand. But he opened and closed his big hands, and actually grabbed all the divine light in the sky. The two inherited methods of the 9 Immortals cauldron were integrated into Su Tong's actual combat. An unprecedented feeling came over him. As his pace became faster and faster, his figure became more and more erratic, and the forces floating around him began to converging towards oneself. O Poseidon, kill these two heretical evil gods. Seeing the two of them cooperating with each other to kill in the direction of the light ball, Ogu and the other 7 people's hearts were raised to their throats. In their impression, Poseidon's power is unparalleled. As long as Poseidon is awakened, any terrible enemy can be easily wiped out. No one has ever lasted this long. Roar! GameElements' white body transformed into a divine dragon, his body became an immortal, and he possesses incredible power. At this moment, he became one with nature and man. He held the Wushuang hook and traced the path of the Tao, which is endless and will never be exhausted. Suddenly, a huge hole was opened in the endless divine light in front of him. In this gap, Su Tong Gren had already rushed forward. If Gu Zibai represents the will of heaven and earth, he has become the Tao. Then Su Tong was going against the will of heaven, holding ink in hand and carrying destiny. With the blessing of the 2 secret techniques of the 9 Immortals cauldron, his combat power reached its peak. The idea of Poseidon, which had revived in the ball of light, seemed to be aware of the crisis. The slightly closed eyes gradually opened, and the eyes were colorful and radiant, able to understand the power of all things in the world. When his eyes stared at Su Tong, frightening fluctuations flashed out from his pupils, shooting out like rainbows. In an instant, most of Atlantis' lights and energy were drained. Seeing the divine light coming, time around Su Tong quickly began to slow down. The touch of time and hourglass of time prop cards were activated, making Su Tong the master of this time. While the figure lightly dodged the bright light directed at him, the power of time was also blessed on indifferent. Ouch! Tigers roared in the sky, blessed by destiny. Su Tong's eyes flashed with cold light. Don't say you are just a thought, even if you are really resurrected, I will still have a way to kill you. Accompanied by Su Tong's roar, the two inherited powers of the nine immortals' cauldron were blessed, and in an instant, the power exploded several times more than before. Amoran struck out with a sword in his hand, splitting the world into two, with black on the left and white on the right. Both represent the past and the future. At the moment when black and white alternate, time, space, and everything else are turned into powder. Only the sword in Su Tong's hand is eternal and is like the only one. This is the third sword that Su Tong realized, and it is also his strongest sword, Jijo. Puff. In an instant, the sword light penetrated the figure in the light ball, splitting the figure into two. Ah! Painful roars rippled in the sky above Atlantis, and Aogu and others turned pale. They couldn't believe that the invincible Poseidon was cut open by someone's sword. The thoughts roared in pain, and he finally recovered. He was unwilling to be wiped out like this. Even if it was just a ray of thought, he still had a strong desire to survive. In an instant, he actually absorbed all the energy of Atlantis, trying to force himself back together. But he obviously underestimated the terrifying power of Su Tong's sword. The left is black and the right is white. When the split thoughts fall into it, they no longer belong to the same time and space, but in two different time and spaces, the past and the future. This is the most terrifying place in the world. The past and the future are destined not to appear together at the same time. No matter how hard this thought struggles, the moment Su Tong puts the ink away, time and space shatter, black and white turn into nothingness, and disappear together. What was lost was the thought of this death god. It's a pity that such good alchemy materials are available. Seeing the shattered thought of the god of death, Su Tong was not only satisfied with the effect of the nine immortal cauldron inheritance method, but also felt a little regretful. After all, the thought of the god of death was a good treasure for alchemy. The moment the thought disappeared, Ogu and others felt as if they were struck by lightning. They couldn't believe that Poseidon would be defeated by the two of them working together. Atlantis's energy has also been consumed by more than half, and the barrier has begun to collapse at this moment. At this time, Aogu and others looked ugly, but they could only bite the bullet and prepare to fight Su Tong and others. What they didn't expect was that Su Tong took Gu Zibai directly through the teleportation beacon and disappeared directly in front of them. They left, looking at Su Tong's disappearing figure. Aogu and others looked at each other, a little confused for a moment. When Su Tong and others returned to the Sun battleship through the transmission beacon, the Sun battleship had already sailed out of Atlantis. When everyone saw the two people coming back, before they had time to ask more questions, Su Tong and Gu Zibai said in unison, "Let's go." They killed the idea of a dead god. Although it was a great victory, they also sensed that something seemed to be resurrecting under Atlantis. The strong sense of voyeurism hit them, making them feel, both powerful immortals felt hairy all over. Otherwise, given Su Tong's character, it would be strange not to dismantle Atlantis. But this battle was not entirely fruitless. This high-level battle benefited the two of them a lot, especially Su Tong's deeper understanding of the inheritance power of the Nine Immortals Cauldron. The inheritance blessing of the Nine Immortals Cauldron allowed him to produce 10 times the lethality with one sword strike, but the consumption also showed 10 times the loss, causing 1/3 of his own thoughts to be burned away. The Ziziju allows him to face the attacks of gods with ease, and he can easily use his strength to fight, and the movement technique inherited from the second part allows him to explode with a lethality that is 10 times more than his own. If I could understand the third part of the inheritance, I wouldn't have to run away in embarrassment if I encounter this kind of situation next time. The two rested for a moment to relax from the state of the battle before Chang Wogu came over carrying a half-dead guy. Su Tong took a look and saw that it was Hagrid. Only then did Chang Wuhan have the opportunity to tell everything he had seen. In fact, his original plan was to poison the wine, but before the poison could be poured in, the Sphinx snatched the bottle away. But what everyone didn't expect was that the Sphinx who took away the bottle also poisoned the wine. This guy was calculating the time for the poison to take effect, and deliberately pretended to be flirting with him to let Hagrid and the others take action first. After procrastinating like this, until the poison erupted, the Sphinx was satisfied and took away the Saras gem that gathered the power of the 5 high priests and left. As for Chang Wuhan, the Sphinx didn't notice his life and death at all. It was only at this moment that Chang Wuhan realized that they had been trapped and used as a gun, so he hurriedly informed Su Tong that they were leaving. Perhaps it was because Hagrid's body had been specially modified that he didn't die immediately after the poison broke out. Chang Wuzu simply gave him a pill and brought him back. He believed that he could revive this guy. Then he would understand everything about what happened. Of course, Chang Wuju conveniently brought back the bodies of the other 4 high priests. These 4 people were not so lucky and all died on the spot. However, their bodies were handed over to Gaozhou, which was a good material. Su Tong stepped forward and checked Hagrid's pulse. He found that Hagrid was no longer breathing, but his heart was still beating weakly. His body was still fighting against the poison, but if no external force intervened, I'm afraid it won't last long. But as long as you don't die completely, the rest will be simple. Su Tong summoned the Great Sun Ruyi furnace and washed it repeatedly with a large amount of life force. Hagrid's original physical body had long been shattered by Gu Zibai. This new physical body was painstakingly cultivated by Hagrid. It not only had amazing potential, but also had strong resistance. The poison only made him fake death. At this moment, a large number of after the life force poured into the physical body was replenished, and the person slowly began to regain his breath. Hagrid's face gradually began to turn slightly red, and his skin gradually became redder and redder, and his body began to scratch his throat involuntarily. Seeing this, Su Tong helped Hagrid up and patted the guy's back, and a mouthful of black blood spit out from the guy's mouth. Huh! The moment he spit out the black blood, Hagrid took a deep breath with almost all his strength, his eyes widened, and he lay on the ground trembling. After waiting for a while, Hagrid came to his senses, raised his head, and roared in the direction of Atlantis at the top of his lungs, "Ogu, you are such a bastard!" Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 1115. It is not difficult to understand Hagrid's anger. When the poison in their bodies exploded and they fell into a coma before death, countless possibilities flashed through their minds. Sphinx, as a former student of Ogu, successfully became one of the 12 high priests. I don't know when the relationship between Sphinx and Ogu started to have a rift. As the rift grew, other high priests began to join the Sphinx's camp and began to compete with Ogun overtly and covertly. The purpose is to compete for Atlantis's annual energy quota. After all, that thing is too precious. All research, experiments, and even cultivation require a large amount of energy to support. But there's only so much energy, and whoever takes more won't get it. This is like a power plant that has to generate electricity for 12 factories. The power is limited. If it gives you more power, other factories may have to limit power or even have blackouts. In this environment, there are naturally fewer and fewer indicators that Sphinx and others can obtain. There are 4 high priests behind the Sphinx. The 4 of them are in charge of the core keys of Atlantis, especially weapons research and development and biotechnology. It seems like a balance of power, but who would have thought that Sphinx, the leader of the opposition to Ogu, would actually stand by Ogu's side from beginning to end. This time, it was entirely through Su Tong and the others that these opponents were eradicated directly and legitimately. In this way, no one in the country will be dissatisfied with Ogu's actions. All the blame fell on Su Tong and others. At that time, Ogu and the others only need to kill Su Tong and regain the lost Genesis, and their plan will be completely successful. Drawing firepower from under the cauldron, framing people's faults, and killing people to silence them. Everyone knows these strategies, but not many people can actually use them. Aogu's plan was quickly designated by Aogu after Hagrid brought Su Tong and the others to Atlantis. This old guy who has lived for 400 years is really not a fuel-efficient lamp. The only flaw in his plan was that he failed to use the power of Poseidon to kill Su Tong and Gu Zibai. Otherwise it would be perfect. Hey, this old guy is a disaster as long as he lives. Su Tong couldn't help but sigh, feeling that it was a bit of a loss for not being able to kill Aogu. He had a hunch that Aogu would definitely become a scourge in the future. It's just that the situation at that time was that the god of death under Atlantis had been alarmed. Su Tong and the others did not have time to think about it carefully, and missed the opportunity to kill Aogu. Hagrid also felt that his teacher's plan was perfect, but he did not expect that this plan even included him. Obviously, the fact that he was captured alive by Su Tong and the others this time had made him lose the value of use in the eyes of Ogu. Yes, it's not that we won't let you go. If we let you go back now, I'm afraid you won't even be able to save your life. You can stay and be a consultant. Su Tong saw that he looked like he was mourning for his heir, so he asked him to stay on the Sun battleship. After all, Hagrid still had some real talents. It was also a good choice to let him be a consultant to Master and start off. Boss, are we going to Mount Tai next? Li Bo asked curiously. Yes, go to Mount Tai, Su Tong nodded, but before that, he needed to retreat as soon as possible to completely digest the huge energy of Genesis. A small Atlantis has already hidden its secrets, and there are as many masters as there are, not to mention that in the east at this moment, there are gods flying all over the sky, earth gods walking everywhere, and there are as many enlightened masters as dogs. He and Gu Zibai are really a bit unattractive. So on the way to the east, Gaozhou and the others were happy and relaxed, while Su Tong could only retreat to refine Genesis. How vast is the energy of creation? According to Hagrid, for Genesis, he spent more than 10 years, captured a large number of masters, and used their power to gradually improve Genesis. This also includes 25% of Atlantis' annual energy, which is equivalent to the entire country's efforts to perfect Genesis. In the past, it would have taken Su Tong at least a year, or even 2 years, to completely refine such a huge amount of energy. But how could Su Tong have so long to refine Genesis? So Su Tong thought of a clever way. He first used the tidal phenomena to transform himself into the same divine physique as Genesis, and directly absorbed Genesis. This saves the step of absorption, and then plunges into the Ruyi furnace of the Great Sun and practices with oneself. Fortunately, Su Tong dared to think of this method. If it were anyone else, he would really not dare to do this, for fear of accidentally turning himself into a scumbag. But I have to say that Su Tong's method is really effective. In the Ruyi furnace of the Great Sun, the power of creation in the body was rapidly transformed, and then reabsorbed by Su Tong. This allowed his originally wasted thoughts to quickly return to their peak in a short period of time, and then break through one level again, reaching 972. These thoughts formed a Tai Chi diagram, which slowly rotated in Su Tong's consciousness. With each rotation, the fairy clouds on Su Tong's body increased by one layer. I saw bursts of auspicious clouds accompanied by colorful lights, and a golden glow gradually illuminated the back of Su Tong's head. This is the sign of promotion to Golden Immortal. But what surprised Su Tong the most was that there were many primitive rules in Genesis. The power of these rules is a kind of vein of heaven and earth, but it is different from those scattered fragments of heaven and earth, but complete rules of heaven and earth. It includes part of earth, wind, water, and fire, as well as space and time. Su Tong was not polite about the power of these rules and directly used Yan Shu to turn them into innate talismans and integrate them into himself. At this time, Su Tong suddenly thought that those prop cards might be some kind of regular power that was transformed into prop cards by the gods. This idea should be correct, otherwise how can ordinary people quickly master the power that exceeds that of ordinary people who have practiced martial arts for more than 10 years with just one prop card? But in the final analysis, these are just methods used by the gods to control players. If you want to survive the attack between the gods and the god of death, you must find your own way. With this idea in mind, Su Tong simply refined the power of Genesis while summoning the 9 immortals cauldron, preparing to comprehend the third part of the inheritance. While Su Tong was practicing in seclusion. At the same time, in other script worlds, inhuman massacres began to spread one after another in the script world. All the players were mobilized. In order to complete the so-called mission of the gods, they were like locusts, engulfing other scenario worlds one after another. A large number of creatures were directly killed, and countless resources were plundered by players. The more they kill, the more divine seals they have on the memorial tablets they summon. The blessings it brings are also more powerful. The players from the Western camp were the first to bear the brunt. Faced with the Alliance army, which was armed to the teeth and covered with reinforcements, these Western players were immediately defeated like chickens and dogs. Even if they want to escape, in front of players who have flying paper and teleport beacon, they have no way to go to the sky and no way to the earth. In the end, they could only huddle into the confines of the Holy See and rely on the powerful power of the Holy See to defend it. When the players discovered that these Western players began to join forces with the Holy See and became increasingly difficult to deal with, they simply stopped wasting energy on them and directly turned to the scenario world where European, Japanese, Russian, Indian, and other players lived. Large-scale massacres have begun to make many players escape into the real world. But when these players entered the real world and thought they could enjoy the tranquility and peace in reality, they were horrified to find that all players who returned to reality could only stay for 7 days. If you do not enter the script world again for 7 days, 1/3 of the prop cards will be taken away. If you do not enter the script world for the next 7 days, all the script points will be taken away directly. If you don't go back, what you are waiting for is to be forcibly recalled and sent directly to the script world to be cannon fodder. Punishments have also become more severe than ever. There are some rumors that some players have seen scenes of gods fighting in the script world. Rather than saying that the sky was shattering, it was better to say that it was destroying the world. Obviously, it was not only their players who were killed, but also the gods. It's just that the level and strength of most players don't allow them to access this level. At this moment, in a world in ruins, Meng Changsheng smiled and walked to the gun god Buluan holding a pot of sunflowers growing out of a woman's head. "Captain, the 34 sacred monuments are about to be collected. According to the agreement, the gods they should have sent us everything we wanted. 34 divine monuments, each of which must be engraved with the divine seal. It is unknown how many creatures must be killed and how many script worlds must be destroyed to accomplish this. Now the 6 regiments have joined forces and have been killing crazily for so long before they can barely complete the 34 sacred monuments. According to the agreement, the gods will perform a large-scale blessing for the 6 groups and give each person a flat peach. As long as you eat this flat peach, you can forcibly increase your strength to a higher level. Not only that, there are also a large number of prop cards and a large number of script points. These rewards are right in front of you, no wonder Meng Changsheng is so excited. The only pity is that the last plan to encircle and suppress the 7 sects was disrupted by the Western Holy See and a strange and weird god. The Vatican side was fine, but that fat lady of unknown origin caused many casualties in their 6th Regiment alliance. Even Buelyuan felt a chill running down his spine and had to take the lead in withdrawing with the alliance army. Fortunately, the fat girl didn't seem to be interested in them, so she turned around and ran away. Otherwise, I'm afraid their 6th Regiment will have to pay a higher price. Yeah, almost. Buelyuan nodded blankly. Go and prepare. The messengers of the gods are coming soon. Okay. After Meng Changsheng left, he saw a burst of laughter coming from behind the stone. A group of fools are still dreaming. They really think that the gods are good people. Let them see the arrogance of the gods when the time comes. Along with the sound of talking, blind Mankang walked out with a face and came to Buelyuan. Are you really not going to tell them? Buelyuan sat casually on the ground. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. The thing that can unite everyone will definitely not be kindness, but hatred can. When blind Mankang heard this, he thought it made sense. Back then, the old man from the 7 sects went on a killing spree in Buman Mountain, but in the end, all the low-life sects united together. This is also the reason. Hearing this, Buelyuan became interested, raised his head and asked, what about the result? In the end, all the old men from the 7 sects were killed. Blind Mankang had a wry smile on his face. All the magic sects in the world had enmities with the 7 sections. It was lucky that the lineage of Commander-in-Chief Midas was preserved, otherwise there would be no blind Mankang without him. Thinking of this, blind Mankang simply took out the tortoise-shell copper coins, sat down and started counting. Buelyuan on the side saw this and asked, what is it? What is the future of that brat named Su, dead or alive? I don't know. He can end up alone like the old man from Kimen and end this bad era. Blind Kang's words were most likely a joke. After all, he didn't even dare to think about such a thing, let alone Su Tong. He just shook the tortoise shell in his hand casually and spilled the 9 copper coins inside. After playing with it a few times, blind Mankang couldn't help but look weird. How? Seeing that blind Kang looked wrong, Buelyuan asked what the result was. Blind Mankang scratched his head. There is no such person. Seeing this, blind Mankang continued to count without giving up. This time, he saw the pupils hidden under his eyelids in his cloudy eyes opening, and he began to count again. But before the results came out, there was a thunder and lightning in the sky, hitting the two of them directly on the head. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 1116. Whoosh. A ray of golden light rushed out from the sun battleship and headed straight to the top of the sky. Everyone raised their heads and watched, only to see golden light scorching their eyes, dyeing the sky golden like a sun. The boss is out of custody. Gao Zhou and others heard the commotion and came out of the cabin where they were resting. They have been sailing for more than 10 days, and not far ahead is the land of China that they miss deeply. But without Su Tong's explanation, they had not dared to rush back rashly. After all, Su Tong was still in retreat at the critical moment. If they encounter any big trouble, they will suffer a small loss, but if it affects Su Tong's retreat, they will suffer a big loss. The sky is bright with flames, silver bars are shining, fairy clouds are entwined, and there is peace. Is this to become a heavenly being? Gu Zibai raised his head, his eyes were like fire, he could see through reality at a glance, and he could clearly see the true form of the Ruyi furnace. When he looked at the brilliant golden clouds, he couldn't help but sigh with emotion on his face. There are 5 types of immortals listed in Zhonglu Chuan Daoji: ghost immortals, human immortals, earth immortals, gods, and heavenly immortals. Celestial beings are the highest level of Taoist immortals. The 5 qi are facing the UN, and the 3 flowers on the top of the head are the image of turning from virtual to real, juxtaposed with the gods and gods. Just the level of strength requires time and opportunities to accumulate. In other words, the level is maxed out, but the equipment is not yet at the top level. Buzz. The Ruyi furnace of the great sun was buzzing in the sky, and bits of crystal light overflowed from the furnace, like golden flowers falling and raining down. Hagrid looked at this little golden light and his heart ached. These golden lights are not dregs, but the energy of creation. He has worked hard for more than 10 years, plus the energy accumulated from the huge energy of Atlantis. Isn't this a waste? But he didn't know that at this moment, the massive amount of sacred energy, transformed by the great sun Ruyi furnace, was frantically washing Su Tong's body and thoughts. The amount was so huge that Su Tong tried his best to absorb it, but it was impossible to absorb it all. Most of it was rushed out. This was an extremely extravagant squandering. There was a golden wheel with bright golden light behind Su Tong's head, but he saw a group of living beings chanting scriptures and blessing Su Tong above. I saw the little fat man of the second spirit, sitting upright, looking as plump as Maitreya in the temple. He was surrounded by Dia, Yongxuan, Fasai, Jixiang, Sun Li, and even the 5 dark fleshy men. The ball was actually among them. As the saying goes, when one person attains enlightenment, chickens and dogs ascend to heaven. Absorbing the power of Genesis, Su Tong's thoughts tripled from the initial 324 to 972, and then tripled to 2916. From the status of a loose immortal, he was promoted to the level of a heavenly immortal. Even the entrance to the hall behind him was glowing with countless mysteries, blending into the golden light of the Dao fruit behind Su Tong's head. Everyone received great benefits. The scriptures he read in his mouth were praises to Su Tong. Just the sound of chanting resounded throughout the world, so that the entire sun battleship was wrapped in Su Tong's golden light. Fortunately, no one passed by here, otherwise they would be shocked. The sound of chanting continued for 3 more days, and the endless life energy poured out from the Ruyi furnace of the great sun, turning into pure crystals and falling down. For a while, Chang Wuju and others took action to collect the crystals, but occasionally some crystals would fall down and fall into the deep sea. Boom! Suddenly, there was a huge earthquake. On the 24th day, divine light shot into the sky and dispersed the sea of clouds in the sky. When the huge breath of life dissipated, a warm light pierced the clouds from the sky and shone on the sea below. For a moment, the world was quiet, filled with a peaceful atmosphere, like a god coming to the world. Su Tong walked out of the Ruyi furnace of the great Sunday. His body was crystal clear, transcending the 3 realms and not among the 5 elements. He stood up slowly, and the moment he clenched his fists, he felt like he could hold the entire world in his hands. Su Tong was calm in body and mind, and restrained the golden light on his body. He did not try anything, because there was no need to do that. He clearly knew how powerful he was at the moment. At this moment, he has unparalleled confidence. If he encounters a fat girl like Niu Niu again, he can easily handle it. However, he did not dare to be complacent about this. Niu Niu was just a small role, and his real enemies were not only the gods, but also the dead gods who were accompanied by the old gods. My own strength is not enough to deal with them. What's more, there is a guy like the youngest who hides everything. If they meet, it will be a blessing to escape. Su Tong fell down, but did not take back the great Sun Ruyi furnace. Instead, he grabbed Li Bo and threw it directly into the great Sun Ruyi furnace. You all go in, there is too much energy in it, you can absorb as much as you can, tens of millions, you're welcome. With that said, Li Bo was thrown into the Ruyi furnace. Now Gu Zibai and the others were not polite. He raised his big hand, grabbed Master who was at a loss and jumped directly into the Ruyi furnace, followed closely by Gao Zhou and Chang Wugu. Even Amida is no exception. When Su Tong saw Hagrid looking blank, he also kicked him in. There was so much energy that it couldn't be absorbed by just a few people. Su Tong even didn't let go of several soldiers such as Ji Zhou and threw it directly into the Great Sun Ruyi furnace. I wanted to let my sister in, but she didn't want to. She is from the Snow Clan, and she is most afraid of water and fire. Moreover, she is not good at fighting. She has already practiced hard enough and there is no need to continue practicing hard. Seeing that Ame was unwilling, Su Tong did not force it, and threw some more relatively strong warriors inside, holding his arms around the fire to avoid accidentally turning these people into slag. As soon as everyone entered the Ruyi furnace, they jumped up and down. The temperature inside was comparable to that of a frying pan. Ouch, it hurts me so much. Gao Zhou howled in pain, his skin and flesh were torn all over his body, and he felt like he was going to be cooked in an instant. Looking back, Master, Ji Zhou and others were even more unbearable. One by one, they fainted immediately. Only Chang Wuju, Gu Zibai, and Haig looked normal. However, what surprised Gao Zhou was that instead of looking uncomfortable, Li Bo, the fat guy, looked like he was enjoying himself. Stop talking nonsense, hurry up and suck as much as you can. Gu Zibai glared at Gao Zhou, and then he lay down on the ground with a tiger-like shape, which was exactly the move of Wu Qingxi. All of a sudden, the pores on his body opened, and his whole body was like a huge whirlpool, absorbing the energy around him crazily. Chang Wuhen and others did not have such means, but it did not prevent them from speeding up to devour the energy in the furnace. Chang Wuhen opened and closed his hands, stretched out his hands to grab the surroundings, and saw countless energies in his palms being swept away by a burst of space. The force is continuously compressed into golden elixirs and sent to the mouth. Seeing that the two of them were absorbing it so hard, Gao Zhou did not dare to neglect him at all. In terms of personal strength, Gao Zhou was not outstanding in the team. He is only better than Master. Even Li Bo, a fat guy like him, has a tendency for latecomers to come first. But Gao Zhou's foundation in practice is not bad. After all, he comes from a family of foreign arts, which means his foundation is just a little worse than Gu Zibai's. I saw him sitting cross-legged with great pain, and using the method of refining life and death taught by the eldest princess. The suddenly cracked flesh was like a blood plate, greedily absorbing it. Gradually, Gao Zhou felt less pain. Instead, he felt very comfortable, as if he was soaking in a hot spring. Everyone stayed in the furnace for a whole day and night before Su Tong took them out one after another. It's not that the energy inside is not enough, on the contrary, there is still a lot of energy inside, but Ji Zhou and others can't stand it anymore. Su Tong was worried that he would accidentally refine them to death, so he could only throw them out in advance, and then directly threw them in with a new group of soldiers. The strength of these warriors ranged from high to low. They could endure it for a while at first, but then they began to be unable to hold up one by one. Su Tong could only throw it in like mutton, rinse it, count 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then throw it out. Although these warriors were thrown on the deck in a very embarrassed state, when they realized that their strength had improved to a great level in just a short while, they all exclaimed, "It's so delicious." After a while, Master couldn't stand it anymore. He struggled to show his head, but was slapped down by Su Tong. As a logistics researcher, Master may not need too strong combat power, but at least he must have vitality. Guaranteed. You can't just blow someone over with a gust of wind, so this guy naturally became the focus of Su Tong's attention. It took 3 shots, until Master was filled with energy before being thrown out by Su Tong. Then he looked at the 6 people left in the furnace. These 6 people are all masters with strength and foundation. However, even though the 6 of them sucked desperately, they still could not stop a large amount of energy from overflowing from the furnace. In the past few days, golden rain has rolled down on the sea, and countless monsters have appeared on the sea, causing a bloody storm for the golden rain. There were even some demonic beasts that rushed straight into the sky without knowing whether to live or die. Su Tong saw that this was the seafood delivered to his door. Of course he was not polite. He raised his hand and knocked him unconscious. He threw it onto the Sun battleship and threw Meng Po's pot with him. Come out and plan to cook a seafood smorgasbord. Of course, with my own cooking skills, I definitely wouldn't be able to do it, so I still have to leave this matter to Ame. A full 7 days passed. After the 6 people in the furnace frantically absorbed it, the energy that overflowed from the furnace stopped leaking out, and Su Tong easily threw all the people out. As a result, everyone's body was swollen, as if they had gained 100 pounds out of thin air. Even a human being like Gu Zibai is no exception. After Su Tong put away the Ruyi stove, they lay on the ground one by one, not even bothering to move. The energy is so rich that they can only absorb it desperately, but it still takes a lot of time to completely digest it. So this big pot of seafood rice is destined to have no fate with them. Su Tong simply called out the saved tribal men to eat together, and asked about the current customs of China. It's a pity that most of these tribal men are half otakus, and their activity radius is the tribe between a few hills. If you are further away, you don't know anything about it? Just when Su Tong was secretly feeling a little disappointed, one of the men from these tribes suddenly said, "What do you want to know?" Su Tong looked at this person and felt that he looked familiar. After thinking about it carefully, oh, by the way, when Gu Zibai and Simon were fighting, there seemed to be a man who took the lead in shouting a battle cry to cheer for Gu Zibai. It seemed to be him. At this moment, Su Tong glanced over and found that this man had disheveled black hair, but his eyes were clear and translucent, completely different from the men of these tribes. Obviously he has seen the world, so he asked, "I want to know who is the king in the world today." "Hey, I have been imprisoned for decades. I don't know who the king is, but if you can take me back to Enyi, I guarantee that you will have unimpeded access from now on." Hearing the other party's confident tone, Su Tong narrowed his eyes. "Your Excellency, who is?" The man twirled his hair and said, "I am Xing Tian Dai Feng." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 1117. Enyi. The capital of summer. The place where the world's wealth gathers, the place where the world's powerful gather. There were countless merchants coming and going, and the motorcade was like a long queue, stretching for dozens of miles. "Ha ha ha ha, I'm finally back." There was a loud roar, and a man wearing an animal skin was seen striding forward. He ignored the people queuing up to enter the city and led people directly to the city gate. I heard the man say as he walked, "Your drink is too boring. I will take you to try the Gilai Su from Enyi later. That is the best wine." The man's voice was very loud, which attracted many people's attention. When they heard the word Gula Su, some people couldn't help but be startled, but when they saw the man's appearance, they suddenly showed contempt. "What kind of wine is Gula Su?" "It is a fine wine refined by the Li people. A jar is worth 10 squares of jade. The most important thing is that this wine is extremely famous, but not many people have actually tasted it, because this wine is the royal wine of the king and ordinary people cannot drink it at all." The shabby-looking barbarian in front of me dared to say that he wanted to drink Guli Su. He really didn't know how high the sky was. However, someone took a closer look and saw a group of people following the man. These people were wearing strange clothes and looked a bit nondescript. They all look chubby and don't look like good people. "Boss, I always feel that this guy is unreliable. His strength is so poor. He can brag to the sky. All the dignitaries in the royal court will kowtow to him when they see him. The heads of the 9 major families will call him grandpa when they see him. That's all." He called out, "I am the king," and it was like the ancient version of Kangxi's personal interview in private. Gao Zhou followed behind and muttered, "You can't blame him for being suspicious. Su Tong didn't believe Xin Tian Daifeng's words. The bullshit is too big. If his status is so respected, how could he fall into the hands of Atlantis? But one thing can be confirmed, this guy is not a man from those tribes. Su Tong looked at the city in front of him. It was more like a huge fortress than a city. I saw the black city wall rising from the ground for hundreds of miles and hundreds of feet high, just forming a square, with a peak at each corner. At the top of the peak, there was a large arrow tower 10 feet high, all made of black stone. Lingren. Wisps of thick spiritual light from the stars surged down from the sky, and the pure spiritual energy was so thick that it was unbelievable. Various auras shone on the buildings in Enyi, and the pavilions, all built with huge stones, had a bright light on their appearance. The water vapor on the ground rose, and the light blue mist slowly rose. The buildings swayed in the mist, and the entire Enyi was like a shining giant beast, swinging its body in the mist. Su Tong wanted to peek directly into Enyi city with his supernatural powers, but was blocked by a strange force. Even with his strength, he couldn't see through the city, which shows how strong the defense here is. Stop. As soon as Xin Tian Daifeng blew the cowhide out of his mouth, he was stopped by two soldiers wearing black armor before he could reach the city gate. These soldiers in black armor looked intently, with their heads raised slightly and their eyes turned to the sky. There were more than a dozen soldiers at the door randomly checking the passers-by, especially those merchants and guards who were wearing weapons. They looked at them carefully before letting them in. The two soldiers stared at Xin Tian Daifeng, who was covered in animal skins and disheveled hair. Their faces were filled with disgust. They frowned and said, "Where did you come from, you wild man? This is Enyi, not the place you should come to. Where did you come from? Go." When Xin Tian Daifeng heard this, he was stunned for a second, and then he became furious. He pointed at the nose of the soldier in front of him. His thick fingers wanted to poke into the soldier's nostril. "You idiot, open your eyes wide, give me this, see clearly who I am." The soldier did not expect that this barbarian would be so arrogant. He immediately became angry and pulled out the dagger from his waist. "You bold barbarian dared to break through the gate of Enyi city. Could it be that you are tired of living? Retreat quickly, otherwise kill without mercy." Following the soldiers' angry roars, 4 more black-armored soldiers immediately surrounded them and glared at Su Tong and others with extremely unkind looks. Xin Tian Daifeng's face turned black with anger at this time, but he was not a fool. Knowing that these idiots didn't recognize him, he snorted coldly and said, "I am Xin Tian Daifeng, tell your supervisor to come out and see you." The soldiers were startled when they heard this and looked at each other. They were very unfamiliar with Xin Tian Daifeng's name. But the two characters Xin Tian are not a surname that ordinary people can have. Among the 9 major families, the Xin Tian family controls 1/3 of Daxia's army, and all of them are masters who are not easy to mess with. When they thought again that the arrogant and domineering attitude of the guy who looked like a savage in front of them was somewhat similar to that of the Xin Tian family, the 4 soldiers suddenly looked a little embarrassed. They don't want to cause trouble, and they are not afraid of 10,000, just in case. It's really the Xin Tian family. Even the cats, dogs, and pets of the Xin Tian family are not something they can afford to offend. Just as the 4 of them were letting them into the city, thinking that more trouble would be better than less trouble, a sad, cold, and sharp voice suddenly came over. "Xin Tian Daifeng? I've never heard of it. Who are you? How dare you pretend to be a member of the Xin Tian family?" Everyone looked back and saw an official with a tall head and a tall hat and long sleeves walking down the city wall. This official has a triangular face, slender eyebrows, and 2 small, shriveled lips. He looks miserable. His skinny body looked as if a gust of wind could knock someone down. Su Tong and others took a closer look and found that this person did not know what kind of evil magic he had practiced. His whole body was as evil as fire, and wisps of strange smoke seeped out from under his skin from time to time. He looked very unappetizing. When Xin Tian Daifeng heard this, his face fell completely. Unlike facing these soldiers did not recognize him and he did not feel strange. After all, he had been kidnapped for so many years. In the past, he would have knelt down to greet the people he saw from a distance. Now, I am afraid that those who have been promoted have long been promoted, and those who have returned to their hometowns are returning to their hometowns. But the guy in front of him was wearing the uniform of a dolly captain and was an upright official. This guy didn't even recognize him. Seeing this, Xin Tian Daifeng was really angry and laughed. Okay, I'm not at home. Are all the losers in Xin Tian's family eating shit? Now even a dolly captain doesn't recognize me. Xin Tian Daifeng became angrier as he scolded and greeted more than a dozen people by their names in one go. Xin Tian weapon, Xin Tian evil, Xin Tian mens. The official was also frightened, his expression suddenly changed, he raised his hand and pulled out a whip from his sleeve, struck it at Xin Tian Daifeng's head, and cursed, "How dare you insult the prince?" A stream of black smoke came out of the whip, and it was drawn down like a poisonous snake. The terrifying power tore through the air with a thunderous roar. It was obvious that it was a deadly move and did not intend to let Xin Tian Daifeng live. Xin Tian Daifeng saw the poisonous whip coming, but he was unable to dodge. Just when his heart sank and he was ready to bear it, he saw a hand lightly grabbing the poisonous whip. What? Seeing someone grabbing his poisonous whip with his bare hands, the official looked horrified. The poisonous whip was held in Su Tong's hand, but the poison beating on it was as if he sensed some heavenly nemesis, and he quickly dodged it. With a pinch of Su Tong's fingers, the poisonous whip was turned into powder. This scene caused the official's expression to change drastically. He glanced around Su Tong and others, and suddenly saw Hagrid with a bloated face. Hagrid's golden hair was so conspicuous that it was difficult not to see it. Immediately his face changed drastically, he pointed at Su Tong and others angrily and said, "They are spies from the High Clan, come here, kill them, kill them." Following the official's roar, the surrounding soldiers drew their weapons in unison, and at the same time a huge gong sounded, and the mechanisms on the surrounding giant arrow towers quickly aimed at Su Tong and others. Upon seeing this, Gao Zhou and others quickly surrounded Su Tong in the middle. "Boss, what should I do? Those two big things don't seem to be easy to deal with." The big thing Gao Zhou was talking about was the huge divine towers on the left and right ends of the city wall. Wisps of starlight began to gather on the divine towers. At first glance, it's not an ordinary thing. We are not in good health right now, otherwise we should retreat first. Gu Zibai said. It's not that they're afraid, but it's really inconvenient, because too much energy is absorbed, which makes it difficult for them to digest the energy for a while, and instead turns them into fat men one by one. That is to say, Xin Tian Daifeng said that he had a way to make Gu Zibai and the others quickly digest the excess energy, so Su Tongke came with a group of people. With the experience of Atlantis, this time Su Tong directly asked Master and Ame to dock the battleship a little further away from Enyi. If there is any danger, they can quickly leave through the teleportation beacon. Su Tong turned around and looked at Xin Tian Daifeng at this moment. "Who are you, the people you called just now?" He calls himself a master of acting and can read people very accurately. Xin Tian Daifeng's anger just now was definitely not fake. That kind of anger that he was angry at and hated for his weakness made Su Tong curious about what this guy was. Identity. "They are all my grandsons," Xin Tian Daifeng said angrily. "Haha, that's easy." Su Tong grinned, then raised his head and took a deep breath. Suddenly the sky and the earth changed color, as if the infinite wind was flowing backwards. The surrounding air seemed to be completely sucked dry by Su Tong. Then Su Tong spit out the breath, which was mixed with Su Tong. Roar. "Thieves from the Xin Tian family, your grandpa is back." The sound was like thunder on the ground, and it resounded throughout Enyi city for a while, and the sound was continuous and continuous. Crazy, crazy, you are looking for death. The official was also shocked by this roar, his expression suddenly changed, he pointed at Su Tong and others and cursed. Just as he finished speaking, he heard the sound of the ground shaking in the distance. I saw a group of iron cavalry rushing out of Enyi city, stretching into two black lines that seemed to have no end. In the flying dust, they were all black ink unicorns. The person rushing in front was the elder of the Xintian family, Xintianmens. This team was extremely fast, and they had already rushed to the gate in just a cup of tea. The Dark Kylan army exuded an iron-blooded murderous aura, causing those businessmen who were watching the excitement to flee one by one. Who shouted just now? Xintianmen's eyes were like bells, and he was holding an axe that looked like a door panel. With a roar, he smashed the axe in his hand on the ground. Boom, there was a loud sound, and a huge crack was opened by the axe. The broken stones were thrown around. Some people were hit by the stones before they could dodge. In an instant, the stones penetrated directly through the body, smashing the person into a bloody mess. A sparkling hole. At this time, Xintian Daifeng's eyes widened, and he grinned on his thin face, showing his big black teeth. Hey, are all the children of Xintian's family dead? Mens, where is your father? When Xintianmens heard this, he was about to raise his axe to hit the man, but he didn't know that just as he raised the axe, Xintianmens glanced at the face of the person who was speaking, and suddenly he was as stunned as if he had been struck by lightning. On the unicorn. Bang, with a sound, the axe in his hand was thrown to the ground. In everyone's shocked eyes, he rolled down from Mo Kylan, crawled in front of Xintian Daifeng, and hugged Xintian Daifeng. Feng's black and sour smelly feet, Grandpa.